So apparently I made a huge mistake in my micro review of Daggerheart that was really supposed to be more of an announcement of a giveaway of my copy of Daggerheart than anything. I mischaracterized the a la carte setting framework approach of the game as a cohesive setting where all the available races live in the same world, whereas in actuality, you pick and choose your ancestries and the principles and the geography of your world before you play each campaign. I erroneously thought that since all those races live in the same world, the setting was absurd and not really for me. But the races are just options on a menu. Daggerheart's creators don't give you a setting out of the box. They actually sort of give you 6 settings out of the box, and they are each somewhat customizable. To be honest, it's a cool idea. It opens up a ton of possibilities for tables to direct the type of game that they play. But it also means that the GM and the players have to have a session 0. That is, a session before they actually start rolling dice and playing as their character, where they develop the relatively briefly described setting campaign frameworks. Let's actually go through each of the 6 campaign frameworks that the Daggerheart core rulebook offers in some detail to see if any of them would be appealing to you. After we get through all of them, I'll give you my personal general pros and cons of this approach to setting. By the way, sometimes I refer to them as settings, sometimes as campaigns, and sometimes as frameworks, and that's because they're really all 3. Let's check them out. The Witherwild is a low-complexity campaign framework centered on ecological corruption and invasion dynamics. The basic premise involves Haven, a militaristic nation invading the ancient forest of Fainwick, which triggers a supernatural plague called the Serpent's Sickness that transforms the land into an ever-expanding corrupted wilderness. The corruption spreads through magical means, transforming normal flora and fauna into twisted, oversized versions that consume massive resources and threaten both invaders and defenders. The setting establishes a 3-way conflict between Haven's military forces, Fainwick's displaced inhabitants, and the growing Witherwild itself as an environmental antagonist. The campaign uses a corruption mechanic where adversaries can gain withered tokens that alter their appearance and abilities. And it includes session mechanics for tracking the spread of corruption and managing environmental threats over time. Multiple community types are available, including displaced Fainwick refugees, Haven military occupiers, coastal traders, and nomadic groups, each with distinct relationships to the invasion and corruption. The ancestry and class options are tailored to reflect the militaristic and forest-dwelling cultures in conflict. Player principles emphasize personal stakes in the invasion's consequences and embracing vulnerability during environmental chaos. GM guidance focuses on contrasting natural beauty with corruption, showing environmental devastation, and providing alternatives to pure violence resolution. The campaign includes distinctive environmental cycles with alternating day-night periods of different lengths and a progressive plague that transforms victims into stone statues. 5 Banners Burning is a medium complexity political warfare campaign centered on 5 rival nations locked in escalating conflict. The basic premise involves nations that previously coexisted under divine protection, but which now face inevitable war after their gods departed and primordial chaos forces began influencing mortal affairs. This framework uses a faction relationship system with numerical ratings from -3 to +3, tracking each nation's standing with others, creating dynamic political alliances that shift based on player actions. An objective countdown mechanic tracks each nation's progress towards major goals, with completed objectives triggering significant political or military changes across the continent. The 5 nations include Armada, a pirate federation, Hilltop, a theocracy, Jestane, a military republic, Polaris, a magical industrial power, and Voldon, a traditional monarchy, each with distinct assets, problems, and strategic objectives. Multiple community types exist within each nation, from ruling elites to displaced refugees, each with different relationships to the ongoing conflicts and varying stakes in potential outcomes. Player principles focus on character allegiances, reflecting or refuting their origins, maintaining their principles under pressure, taking meaningful small actions, and treating people as symbols versus individuals. GM principles emphasize forcing loyalty choices, creating ideological tensions, manifesting historical consequences, and positioning dramatic moments strategically, which is easier said than done. The campaign includes distinctive elements like inevitable warfare, significant historical impact from player decisions, collateral damage affecting innocent populations, and major thematic questions about governance and resource management. Beast Feast is a medium complexity campaign centered on culinary dungeon exploration, where players venture into monster-filled caverns to gather ingredients and cook magical meals. The basic premise involves the village of Elmore losing its protective magical charm that kept dangerous creatures away, forcing villagers to seek help from adventurers, that's you, willing to enter the monster-infested Plover Caves to reestablish the protection and hunt creatures for food. The setting establishes an extensive underground cave system filled with diverse biomes, creatures, and ingredients that form the basis of both the villagers' economy and magical protection. The caves are structured in distinct layers, representing increasing depth and danger, with specific environmental features like bioluminescent formations and dangerous catacombs at the deepest levels. Ancestry and class selections emphasize how characters adapted their skills for the new reality of dungeon exploration and monster hunting. Player principles emphasize building characters from humble village origins, staying true to food-focused motivations, balancing comedy with genuine heart, and creating personal conflicts through competing interests. GM guidance focuses on making food descriptions delicious and engaging, giving creatures clear purposes beyond combat, and crafting meaningful personal conflicts between characters. The campaign includes distinctive magical elements like the Lure, a concentration of magical energy that attracts dangerous creatures, beast classification systems with blooms that provide different ingredient types, and detailed cooking mechanics. A comprehensive cooking system allows players to create magical meals from monster ingredients with detailed recipes, flavor profiles, and mechanical benefits tied to the successful preparation of the food. The framework includes random generation tables for ingredients and cooking inspiration, plus advanced recipes for higher level play and expanded downtime activities. The Age of Umbra is a high-complexity apocalyptic campaign set in a world where divine abandonment has triggered societal collapse and supernatural corruption. The basic premise involves survivors in the Halcyon domain struggling against spreading darkness after the gods departed, leaving behind a world where shadow creatures and malevolent forces prey on scattered communities trying to preserve light and hope. Campaign-specific mechanics include corruption tracking, environmental danger rolls, fiery beacons as protective magical items, and soul blight rules for characters becoming undead. The setting establishes a world where grand cities have fallen into ruin, survivors cluster around sacred pyres for protection, and various factions struggle over resources while fighting supernatural corruption. Multiple community types exist, ranging from fortified settlements around sacred pyres to underground survivors, nomadic wanderers, and coastal communities, each with different survival strategies and relationships to the supernatural threats. All ancestries and classes are available, with emphasis on how magical abilities interact with the corrupted world state. Player principles focus on treating community as survival necessity, remembering that darkness isn't entirely evil, finding joy amid hardship, and considering character roles in the larger survival effort. GM guidance emphasizes omnipresent threats, frequent light-darkness contrasts, compassionate storytelling, goal diversity, and building combat as puzzles requiring strategic thinking. The campaign includes distinctive elements like eternal gloom with volatile weather, death becoming a curse that creates undead, shadow-touched societies, and widespread magical corruption. And magic itself is treated as suspicious by survivors, with ether weaving practices viewed as potentially responsible for the apocalyptic conditions and the divine abandonment that caused all this in the first place. Motherboard is a maximum complexity post-apocalyptic campaign set in a world where ancient technology has been corrupted by a malicious virus that turns autonomous machines into violent threats. The basic premise involves survivors in the Echo Vale, living among the ruins of fallen civilization, using scavenged technology while facing constant threats from corrupted remnants, which are autonomous machines infected by the virus that attack settlements and travelers. The setting establishes a world where the Motherboard, which is a central AI system, once managed civilization through a vast network, but abandonment led to technological corruption that destroyed the cities and forced survivors into scattered communities. The community types suggested include those composed of walled city dwellers, nomadic wanderers, underground survivors, and mountain communities, each with different relationships to the technology and with different survival strategies. Ancestry restrictions actually apply here, which is one of the rare instances where it happens in this book. The restriction is that there are no playable clanks allowed, since all autonomous beings are remnants. Generally, the classes emphasize technology integration through spell casting that uses repurposed devices instead of traditional magic. Player principles focus on replacing magic with technology, creating shared technical language, contrasting technological and emotional elements, and considering character relationships with both technology and remnants. GM guidance emphasizes filling the world with technological ruins, making conflicts grounded in personal stakes, and positioning tradition against technological progress. The campaign includes distinctive elements like technomancy, which is technology appearing magical to survivors, network tethers for data access, scrap-based economy, and quantum currency systems. Campaign-specific mechanics include tech damage instead of magical damage, Iconis, personalized technological weapons, augments, cybernetic enhancements, armor preferences, and network tether systems for information access. Extensive crafting systems allow players to build augments and weapons from scavenged materials, with detailed construction rules and a complete alien language called Code, K-O-H-D, used by the fallen civilization's technology. Colossus of the Drylands is a high complexity desert monster hunting scenario with some pretty interesting structural elements. The basic premise is an imprisoned god had his soul split into 9 pieces that became massive creatures called colossi. Players hunt these creatures in a desert biome. Instead of single health pools, colossi have multiple body parts, each with independent hit points and abilities. This creates tactical positioning requirements, but also significantly increases combat complexity and duration. The campaign uses a 3-phase structure: hunt, interlude, boss fight. The hunt phase involves investigation and tracking, interludes handle downtime and community interaction, and boss encounters are extended multi-segment battles that can span multiple sessions. The overarching narrative has an inherent contradiction built into it. Defeating colossi progresses the campaign, but also strengthens the ultimate antagonist, since the soul shards return to that imprisoned god who is actually the big bad guy. This creates a predetermined escalation regardless of player choices. Okay, so here are my thoughts on the campaign framework approach that Daggerheart takes to settings. Pros: immediate buy-in for players and GMs. Each campaign frame acts like a pre-built pitch deck. Players get a sense of tone, genre, and core conflicts within a few paragraphs, which drastically cuts down on session 0 drift and confusion about what kind of game everyone wants to play. It's also a gift for GMs. They get tone guidance, factions, mechanical tweaks, and an inciting incident all laid out. That can save time and focus the group's energy where it belongs, which is character relationships and dramatic choices. Choose your ancestries. I think my biggest issue with Daggerheart, one that I was mistaken about in my previous video, was that you had all these ancestries floating around and it just felt like in-stage Forgotten Realms, this whole zoo of unlikely races and cultures all living together. In reality, it's actually kind of the opposite with Daggerheart, at least if you want it to be. Each setting framework asks you to pick and choose which ancestries you want to include in that world. It's all a matter of personal preference, of course, but I find worlds with just 2 or 3 main sentient species to be potentially a lot more fascinating and ripe with meaningful storytelling than ones that might be described as Halloween Town, and Daggerheart lets you dial that in. Each frame encourages moral complexity. None of these settings are clean. The gods are flawed, the heroes are unprepared, the enemy isn't always wrong. Most of these frameworks are asking the PC what they stand for and what they're willing to compromise. That's potentially rich ground for meaningful campaign arcs, not dominated by just power fantasies and endless campaign encounters. Cons: tonal inconsistency. Because each framework has such a distinct flavor, running multiple campaigns of Daggerheart back to back could be jarring. The rules stay the same, but the tone does a 180 between frames. If one group just finished Beast Feast, that goofy culinary romp, they might struggle to recalibrate for the dread-drenched voice-stealing horror of Muckwillow. The baseline mechanics don't telegraph a genre, so it's on the GM to maintain mood, and it's on the players to adjust to each new flavor when they get to it. High demands on GM prep. The frames in the book help you get started, but they're also a bit sprawling at times and maybe a tad short in most cases. 5 Banners Burning or Godwake introduce full geopolitical systems or divine metaphysics that require serious investment from the GM to run well. They don't really hold your hand. If you as the GM expect a plug-and-play collection of campaigns, you might be in for a rude awakening. The ideas of some of the tools are certainly there, but the GM still has to put some sweat into it. Risk of analysis paralysis in Session 0. Because the frameworks come loaded with lore, questions, distinctions, and optional mechanics, it's potentially very easy to overwhelm a new group in the required Session 0. You could end up spending way too many hours just talking about which gods to worship, which faction hates which, or which ancestries should and shouldn't be included. That's actually pretty fun for a lore-oriented table, but it could bog down momentum before a campaign with more casual or newer players. Daggerheart's campaign frameworks approach is a bold swing. The frames themselves are genre-rich, morally layered, and modular. They give GMs just enough structure to launch compelling stories without locking anyone into a single world or tone. It does take a lot more imagination and consensus to get a campaign going, but if you want a system that trusts your table to tell personalized, meaningful stories, then Daggerheart might be worth a shot. The real question is whether the unique mechanics in each of the frameworks is actually enough to support the intended playstyles, or if they're just bolted on to the core Daggerheart system. And my biggest concern is if these frameworks can serve for more than a single campaign. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Daggerheart so far. I've left links down below to where you can get the PDF. Thanks as always for watching. I'll see ya.